My name is Rebecca Cole. I'm 39 years old. The day I walked into my sister's wedding in full military dress, I wasn't looking for reconciliation. I came to witness what erasure looks like in pastel and pearls. She mocked me in front of 200 guests, called me a gate guard with a smirk. But when her groom stood up, turned to the crowd, and saluted me, the room changed. They didn't erase me. They exposed themselves. Before I tell you everything, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you? The ones who swore they loved you, whose smiles were supposed to be your safe harbor? I have. And the memory, even now, years later, can still taste like ash in my mouth. It began with fire, not of rage, but of a quiet, internal burning. A slow, agonizing charring of everything I thought was true. It was my sister's wedding, a day painted in the softest pastels, a celebration of new beginnings. But for me, it was a stage. A meticulously crafted set for a public execution of my very existence. I walked in my full dress blues, not looking for reconciliation, not hoping for a truce. I came to bear witness to what erasure truly looks like, dressed up in satin and pearls. She mocked me, my own sister, in front of 200 guests, called me a gate guard with a smirk that twisted her pretty features into something ugly and unrecognizable. The laughter that followed was a chorus of daggers, each one finding its mark. But then a twist. Her groom, a man I barely knew, stood up, turned to the hushed crowd, and saluted me. The room changed. The air thickened with unspoken truths. They didn't erase me that day. They exposed themselves. And the silence that followed, that beautiful, deafening silence, was the sound of their carefully constructed lies crumbling to dust. Before the storm, there was a quiet, almost idyllic calm. My life, at least on the surface, seemed to hum with a gentle, steady rhythm. I was building a career, meticulously, brick by brick, in a world that demanded precision and unwavering dedication. My days were filled with the quiet satisfaction of confidence, the camaraderie of colleagues who understood the weight of responsibility. Evenings often found me curled up with a worn book, the scent of old paper and brewing tea filling the small apartment that was entirely mine. I cherished those moments of solitude, the comforting hum of the refrigerator, the distant city sounds, a stark contrast to the structured chaos of my professional life. My family, or what I believed to be my family, was a different kind of quiet. My sister, Haley, and I had a peculiar dynamic. Growing up, she was the effervescent one, all laughter and bright dresses, while I preferred the quiet corners, lost in thought. Our mother, Barbara, had always gravitated towards Haley's sparkle, a natural inclination, I suppose, for a mother to beam at her most outwardly charming child. I didn't resent it. I simply understood my place. I found my solace in the intricate details of my studies, in the rigorous demands of the path I had chosen. There was a comfortable predictability to our interactions, the polite inquiries about my work, the shared family dinners that felt more like formal engagements than intimate gatherings. We had our traditions, small rituals like Sunday brunch at the local diner, where the scent of griddled pancakes and strong coffee mingled with hushed conversations. Haley would recount her latest social triumph, Mother would offer a proud smile, and I would listen, a quiet observer, content in my own small corner of the world. It wasn't perfect, but it was familiar, a backdrop of normalcy that, in retrospect, made the coming upheaval all the more jarring. We were a family, bound by blood, by shared history, by the unspoken assumption of mutual support. I trusted that. I truly did. But even in that comfortable quiet, the seeds of unease began to subtly, almost imperceptibly, take root. They weren't grand gestures of betrayal, not at first. They were small, almost dismissible moments, like pebbles in a shoe. Odd silences would fall whenever my career was mentioned, a polite shift in conversation. A casual comment from a distant relative, overheard at a family gathering, hinting at a narrative about me that felt distorted. Rebecca's so dedicated, they'd say, the word dedicated hanging in the air with an unspoken implication of isolation, of something slightly off-kilter. My mother, Barbara, would often interject with a quick, dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, you know Rebecca, always off in her own world." It wasn't malicious, not overtly. But it was a consistent downplaying, a quiet erasure of my achievements, my passions, my very identity. Then came my father's funeral. He was a man of quiet strength, a veteran who understood the meaning of service. I arrived in my full dress blues, a uniform that represented years of sacrifice, discipline, and a deep, abiding pride. I expected, perhaps naively, a moment of shared grief, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond my father and I had shared, forged in an unspoken understanding of duty. Instead, there was no seat for me at the front. I stood at the back, a uniformed stranger in a sea of dark civilian suits. My mother approached me, her voice low, laced with a familiar exasperation. "You shouldn't have worn your uniform, Rebecca," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "It looks like you're trying to upstage the family." Upstage. The word echoed in my mind, hollow and cold. She wasn't seeing her daughter, grieving and honoring her father. She was seeing an image that disrupted her carefully curated facade. I left without a word, the weight of her disapproval heavier than any burden I'd carried in combat. They rewrote me in silence that day, pretended I didn't serve, didn't exist as the woman I had become. But I kept every medal, every ribbon, every piece of my story they tried to ignore. I held on to them like talismans, reminders that their narrative wasn't the only one. The unease, once a subtle hum, began to throb with a dull ache. The feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, that the ground beneath my feet was shifting, grew stronger with each passing slight, each quiet dismissal. I started to question everything, to scrutinize every interaction, searching for the crack in the facade, the undeniable proof of the betrayal I could already feel, like a cold hand reaching for my heart. The shatter moment arrived, not with a bang, but with a chilling, almost mundane clarity. It was Haley's wedding, a scene I had rehearsed in my nightmares countless times since my father's funeral. I was seated at table 12, near the fire exit. A place reserved for forgotten guests, for those deemed unworthy of closer proximity to the beaming bride. No rank, no name. Just R. Cole printed in small, unassuming font on the place card. The napkin was the wrong color, a trivial detail, yet it felt like another deliberate slight, another piece of me misaligned, erased. The polite smiles of strangers surrounded me, their conversations flowing around me as if I were a ghost, an empty chair. I listened, observed, a silent sentinel at the edge of their joy. And then came the toast. Haley, my sister, raised her glass, her voice tinkling with a manufactured sweetness that grated on my nerves. And of course, she began, her gaze sweeping over the room, pausing briefly, pointedly, on me. "We have Rebecca. She guards doors. Important ones, I'm sure." A ripple of polite, strained laughter followed. It was a thinly veiled insult, a calculated jab at my military career, at my rank, at the life I had built with my own two hands. A small, insignificant laugh, yet it sliced through me, a chilling realization that she didn't just disapprove, she actively sought to diminish me. But the true shattering came when she grabbed the microphone again, later in the evening, fueled by champagne and a venomous glee. "Honestly," she slurred, her voice amplified for the entire reception, "she's just a gate guard. Who'd want her anyway?" The laughter that followed this time was no longer polite. It was real, raw, cutting laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Each peal was a hammer blow, striking at the very foundation of my self-worth. And then, the ultimate betrayal, the final nail in the coffin of our fractured relationship. My mother, Barbara, stepped forward, her face a mask of feigned concern, but her eyes held a cold, unwavering judgment. "She's the shame of this family," she added, her voice clear and resonant, carrying across the room like a death knell. The world seemed to tilt. The vibrant colors of the wedding, the joyous music, the smiling faces, they all blurred into an indistinct canvas of pain. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My body remained still, outwardly composed, but inside, a vast, desolate landscape of realization spread before me. The world I had trusted no longer existed. The love I believed was unconditional, the bond of family I thought was unbreakable, had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't a loud, dramatic collapse. It was quieter, more intense. A profound silence descended within me, a vast emptiness where warmth and connection once resided. My mind, usually sharp and analytical, became a whirlpool of broken thoughts, fragmented memories of childhood, of shared secrets, of promises whispered under starlit skies. All reduced to dust. The weight of their words, their laughter, their deliberate erasure, pressed down on me, suffocating me. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, a physical manifestation of the emotional devastation. My breath caught in my throat, a silent sob threatening to escape. But I held it in, clenching my jaw, willing myself not to break. This was the moment. The absolute, undeniable breaking point. And in that stillness, in that profound internal pain, a single, undeniable truth began to form. I was utterly, completely alone in that room. And in that terrifying, desolate realization, a flicker of something else began to stir. Not hope, not yet, but a cold, hard resolve. I could have left. The fire exit was just behind me, a silent invitation to escape the suffocating weight of their contempt. Every fiber of my being screamed for flight, for the blessed anonymity of the street outside. But I didn't. I stood, rooted to the spot, in full view of the room that had so gleefully attempted to bury me in their pretty lies, their carefully constructed narrative of my insignificance. There was no screaming, no angry outburst. My fists didn't clench. My jaw, however, was tight, a silent testament to the internal war raging within me. I didn't cry. The tears, if they came, would be shed in private, in the sanctity of my own space. For now, there was only a profound stillness inside. A quiet, burning resolve. I remembered the lessons learned under fire, in places far from the polished elegance of a wedding reception. In the crucible of combat, I had learned that sometimes, silence is the loudest weapon. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of unwavering composure in the face of chaos. The quiet observation, the methodical analysis, the cold, clear assessment of the battlefield. That room, filled with smiling faces and judgmental eyes, was my new battlefield. And I was not about to retreat. My mind, which had felt so shattered just moments before, began to reassemble itself, piece by painstaking piece. I started collecting pieces of truth, not in anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a strategist. Their motives, their insecurities, their desperate need to control a narrative that included me only as a footnote, it all began to crystallize. I analyzed their betrayal, not as a personal affront, but as a tactical maneuver. What did they gain? What did they lose? And what, precisely, was my countermove? This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, not about lowering myself to their level of cruelty. This was about reclaiming control, not just of the moment, but of my entire narrative. I drew strength from the deep reservoir of resilience I had cultivated over years of pushing past my limits, of facing fear head-on, of surviving impossible situations. Each breath I took felt like a small, quiet act of defiance. Each moment I stood there unflinching was a silent declaration of my continued existence, my unwavering selfhood. The anger was there, a dull throb beneath the surface, but it was being transmuted, refined into something colder, sharper, and far more powerful: absolute clarity. This was the beginning of transformation, not a dramatic rebirth, but a quiet, internal forging of a new, unbreakable resolve. I was gathering my strength, not for a fight, but for a meticulous, dignified reclamation. The air in the room was thick with expectation, the silence after my mother's cruel pronouncement stretching taut, almost unbearable. I could feel the eyes on me, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and outright disdain. They waited for me to break, to falter, to crumble under the weight of their collective judgment. But I stood my ground, my posture unwavering, my gaze steady. And then a ripple, a subtle shift in the carefully choreographed drama of the wedding. Andrew, the groom, Haley's fiancé, stepped forward. He had been a silent, almost invisible presence up to that point, a handsome accessory to his radiant bride. Now he moved with a sudden, purposeful stride, his eyes fixed on me. A flicker of confusion crossed Haley's face, then a flash of annoyance. My mother's brow furrowed. The guests murmured, a low hum of curiosity filling the void left by their laughter. And then, in full view of the entire room, of every guest, every betrayer, every silent observer, he did it. He saluted. A crisp, sharp, military salute, the kind that demands respect, that acknowledges rank and sacrifice. My breath hitched. It was an unexpected punch to the gut, but not of pain. Of something akin to shock, then a slow, spreading warmth. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence like a finely honed blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the bewildered faces in the room, "this is Major General Rebecca Cole." He paused, letting the rank hang in the air, a silent bomb dropping into their carefully constructed narrative. "My commanding officer." A collective gasp swept through the room. Haley's eyes, wide with disbelief, fixed on me. And then he continued, his voice softer now, tinged with a deep, unwavering respect, "and the woman who saved my life in Helmand." The silence that followed was absolute. A pin could have dropped and echoed like a gunshot. Haley's face, which had been contorted in a mask of shock and dawning horror, went slack. She swayed, a pale figure in her pristine white gown, and then, with a soft thud, she fainted, collapsing into the arms of a bewildered bridesmaid. My mother, Barbara, still holding her glass of champagne, watched in stunned silence as it slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the polished floor, the sound of breaking glass a fitting accompaniment to the breaking of their carefully constructed illusion. Nobody laughed after that. The air crackled with unspoken truths, with the weight of revelation. It wasn't a roar of triumph, not a vindictive shout of "I told you so." It was a quiet, dignified act of exposure, a perfectly timed reveal that caught them completely off guard. The satisfaction that spread through me wasn't vengeful. It was a deep, quiet contentment, the profound relief of a truth finally, undeniably, brought to light. This was the turn, the moment where the power shifted, subtly, irrevocably. And I hadn't lifted a finger. The fallout was immediate and exquisitely quiet. There was no need for me to clap back, no reason to gloat. The truth, once unleashed, has a way of finding its own destructive path. Haley, when she finally came to, faced a room of uncomfortable stares, not at me, but at her. The whispers were no longer about my supposed disgrace, but about her cruel words, her shocking behavior. The carefully cultivated image of the perfect bride, the charming sister, was shattered. My mother, Barbara, found herself adrift in a sea of polite but pointed avoidance. The shame she had so readily cast upon me had, with Andrew's single, powerful statement, rebounded directly onto her. I saw her attempting to explain, to rationalize, to brush off the incident as a misunderstanding. But the truth, once spoken aloud, had a stubborn resilience. They began to feel the consequences of their actions, not because I directly punished them, but because the truth has a way of catching up, quietly and relentlessly. The invitations to social events dwindled, the friendly smiles grew strained, the calls became fewer and farther between. Their carefully constructed world, built on appearances and selective narratives, began to unravel from within. Meanwhile, I began the quiet, deliberate process of healing. It wasn't a dramatic, instantaneous recovery. It was a slow, meticulous rebuilding, piece by precious piece. My initial reaction to Andrew's unexpected public defense was a profound gratitude, a sense of being seen and validated in a way I hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't looking for anything in return. He simply told the truth. That simple act of integrity was the first true balm to my wounded spirit. I reconnected with old friends, ones who had always seen me, truly seen me, beyond the family drama. There were quiet coffees, long walks, conversations that were deep and empathetic, free of judgment or expectation. I rediscovered the simple joys I had pushed aside in my relentless pursuit of external validation, the intricate art of calligraphy, the quiet meditative rhythm of hiking through dense forests, the comforting familiarity of cooking elaborate meals for myself. These small, everyday acts of self-care became my anchors, rooting me back into a sense of self that had been shaken to its core. I spent more time focusing on my work, channeling my energy into projects that mattered, projects that had a tangible impact, not just on my career, but on the lives of others. The weight of others' opinions, particularly my family's, began to lift. It was replaced by a quiet sense of liberation, a profound understanding that my worth was not, and never had been, dependent on their approval. It was during this period of introspection and quiet rebuilding that the idea for the Resilience Foundation took shape. I realized that my experience, while deeply personal, was not unique. Many soldiers, many individuals, are betrayed not by enemies on a battlefield, but by the very people who claim to love them, by family members who erase their sacrifices, diminish their achievements, or manipulate their narratives for selfish gain. The foundation became my purpose, a way to channel the pain into something constructive, something that could offer support and solace to others navigating similar betrayals. It wasn't about revenge, it was about building something new, something meaningful, out of the ashes of what had been destroyed. Slowly, quietly, I began to reclaim my life, piece by piece, taking back the control and strength that had once been stripped away. Each small victory, each moment of quiet peace, was a testament to the fact that healing isn't just about bold actions, it's about the slow, steady accumulation of self-worth. Closure didn't arrive with a grand declaration or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived quietly, like a gentle dawn after a long, dark night. I am free now. Not because I forgot the betrayal, some scars run too deep to ever truly fade, but because I have outgrown the pain. The bitterness, the resentment, the desperate yearning for their approval, it has all receded, replaced by a profound sense of peace and self-possession. There is no drama, no lingering anger, just the quiet strength of a person who has overcome adversity and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. My life is no longer defined by what happened at that wedding, or by the years of subtle undermining that preceded it. It is defined by the work I do with the Resilience Foundation, by the lives we touch, by the unwavering belief that truth and integrity will always, in the end, prevail. It is defined by the new, healthier relationships I've cultivated, based on mutual respect and genuine understanding. My connection with Andrew, the groom who spoke his truth, has deepened into a quiet, steadfast friendship, built on a foundation of shared values and unspoken understanding. He saw me, truly saw me, when others chose to blind themselves. The healing journey wasn't linear. There were moments of doubt, moments when the old wounds would ache. But each time, I found new ways to soothe them, new strategies to reinforce my own sense of self-worth. I learned that true recovery isn't a return to a former self, but a genuine growth process where you emerge stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than before. I learned to trust my own instincts, to listen to the quiet voice within that had once been drowned out by the noise of external expectations. I have achieved personal goals that once felt impossible, not to prove anything to my family, but to prove to myself the boundless capacity for resilience that lies within each of us. My name, Rebecca Cole, no longer needs their permission to be spoken with the weight it deserves. I walked out of that wedding reception without applause, without a triumphant cheer. But every step I took echoed with the sound of my own truth. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally remembered who I was without their permission. Some names don't need to be reclaimed. They just need to be spoken, with the weight they deserve. And as for the question that started this story, the one about being betrayed by those who were supposed to protect you? My answer is yes, absolutely. But here's the more important question, the one I ask myself every day, the one I hope you ask yourself too. Have you found your way back from betrayal?